Hi, everybody tuning in. My name is Damola Ogunnipe. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, letting everybody that's going to be joining have an opportunity to join. So in about 2 minutes, we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, welcome again for folks that are jumping in to the webinar. We're going to get started in a little less than a minute, just giving everybody an opportunity to get their video set up. So we'll get started here in about 30, 40 seconds. All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Damolo Gundape, and I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Civic Eagle. We're a software platform helping power advocacy groups in the work that they do as it relates to policy research, analysis, and advocacy. And I'm joined today with Andre Fields, PAC Director at Verified Action, and Alex Nipchetsky, the CEO of BallotReady. We're going to have a conversation about best practices for driving voter turnout and claiming our democratic franchise. And we'll also talk about tactics to combat voter suppression. So remember, this conversation is not just for this election cycle, but it's a conversation for this election cycle and beyond, and ensuring the vote and fighting against voter suppression. So we're going to start with Andre. Andre, can you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about Verified Action?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me here today. I am extremely excited to join you all to talk about voter protection and voting. So I work for Verified Action. So the basis of our organization is we promote fair elections in Georgia and around the country. We also encourage voter participation in elections and educate voters about elections and their voting rights. So Fair Fight, what we do is we bring awareness to the public on election reform. We advocate for election reform at all levels, local, state, and national, and we engage in other voter education programs and communications. So we know voter suppression of color, voters of color, and young voters is a scourge, our country faces in states across the nation. So Georgia's 2018 elections shone a bright light on the issues with elections that were rife with mismanagement, irregularities, unbelievably long lines, and more. Exposing both recent and what has been decades-long actions and inactions by the state to thwart the right to vote. Here in Georgia and across the country, people are really ready to fight back and have been fighting back. So our organization really engages in voter mobilization and education activities, and we advocate for progressive issues. In addition to that, we have mounted significant programs to combat voter suppression, both here in the state and nationally. We also have a PAC, which has initiated programs to support voter protection programs at state parties around the country through our Fair Fight 2020 program. And we're engaged in partnerships to support and elect pro-voting rights progressive leaders around the country. Our organization was founded by Stacey Abrams, who was the 2018 Democratic nominee for governor here in the state of Georgia, the first Black woman ever to receive a major party's nomination for governor. So that's a little bit about our organization.
Thanks a lot for sharing, Andre. And one of the things that I love about Fair Fight, and we've been building a relationship with you all for about a year now, but it's the name. It's the name Fair Fight, because that's all we want when it comes to elections. We want a fair fight. So thank you for sharing that, Andre. Alex, can you share a little bit, introduce yourself first and foremost, and then share a little bit about BallotReady?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me today. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of BallotReady. I started BallotReady because I knew, this was in 2014, I knew who was going to be at the top of my ballot, but I didn't know about all the candidates running for local races on my ballot. And so what we do is we make it really easy for voters to understand every candidate and referendum that is on their ballot and cast informed votes all the way down their ballot. And we do that because we know, like, a lot of people are inundated with information about the presidential candidates, but they really care about local issues, and issues like whether it's police brutality, gun violence, the environment, healthcare, education, issues where actually it's local elected officials that make decisions that affect huge changes. So we first and foremost try to make it easy for voters to understand everything on their ballot. What we also do is make it easy for voters to understand how to vote. And this year in particular, we know voting is different because of COVID. And so we're helping people sign up to vote by mail. We're showing them where they can drop off their ballot if they are voting by mail, and when and where they can vote early or in person on election day. Basically, our goal is to make it easy for voters to figure out how to vote and who to vote for so they can use their voice all the way down the ballot.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for introducing yourself. We're all three of us, the three organizations that are leading this conversation today. We're not partisan. We're not pushing any sort of left wing or right wing political agenda. All we're talking about and discussing today is making sure that we respect the franchise that is voting and ensuring that people have the ability to vote. And that's what unites all three of us that are leading this conversation today. And I'm hoping that's what unites the folks that are tuned in and joining this conversation over webinar. So let's go and kick things off. My first question is for both of you. Still a pulse check. How is your organization doing as we navigate a pandemic? Like, let's not forget, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. How's your organization doing? How are you doing if you're still working from home? Just share a little bit of like how you're actually running your organization in the midst of a pandemic. Andre, can we start with you?
Yeah, so when the pandemic first hit earlier this year, we're in the middle, the height of the legislative session here in Georgia. So the way the session goes is, we have the midpoint, which we call crossover day. And basically after crossover day, everything shut down. We got email from our CEO who said, okay, no one comes into office. We are moving 100% virtual. And I think we have navigated that very well. It was, a little bit of a struggle in the beginning because, trying to hop on Zooms all the time, you can't meet with your colleagues like you're normally doing. For me, I was down at the state capitol every day, and it was just, hard, that transition, because I'm like, okay, if I wanted to get an answer from a state rep or a state senator, I can literally just roll up into their office or pull them off the floor, right? But now it's like, I have to call them. I have to schedule a Zoom. So there are all these extra steps that you have to go through. But as the months move past, our organization, they pretty much, they've given us, everything that we've needed. I'm talking about, like, if we needed desks to work for from home, if we need like ring lights for our Zooms, just providing us with resources and making sure that, the entire staff was good. But even further than that, it was a big mental health piece that our CEO came to us and said, hey, I'm really concerned about everyone's mental health. I want to make sure that you're all good. So let me add a stipend, for y'all to, go and get a therapist if you need one, or, talk to someone if you need something. So I think we've navigated pretty well. And I think in about we're in like 7 or 8 now of this thing. This has become our new normal. And, we realized that we won't be going back to the office this year. We probably won't be going back, until late next year, if at all. So I think we have adapted pretty well. The team is doing well. There are times when folks get anxious because it would be easier to, actually be with your colleagues, someone who are friends, right? People you've been working with and like you're in this fight with. But, we just recognize that, hey, like this is what we have to do. And, even if we're not together physically, we're still going to make it happen.
Yeah, definitely. Alex, you're the CEO of a quickly growing, highly effective company. And I mean, right now is kind of like peak, I'm sure peak busy for you. And you're doing it all in the midst of a pandemic. How are you managing your team, managing expectations with all the stakeholders while still trying to make sure that you're as effective as possible in this like really contentious election year?
It's a good question. So one is, I think that I have the sense that now, like, people are more sad and people are more lonely. It's like we've been doing this pandemic for months and it's still going to be so much longer. I can barely even say how much longer it is because it's like hard to acknowledge how long we're going to be like so alone and apart from each other. And I think people are really feeling that right now on our team, but also like, around the world and across the country. One thing we are doing differently this year that we weren't doing before is helping voters figure out how to vote by mail. And that is like as a business pivot for us that makes a lot of sense business-wise because we have this very, deep research that we do. We talk to local election authorities, counties, townships, and they're the ones who determine vote by mail rules. So we can use our skill set really well, and that makes a good product, but it also, I think, makes it very fulfilling to be working toward a thing that like we are very well suited to do and that we can really succeed at, and it's going to make a huge difference this election. So it was like a good business choice, but a good like team building choice. What we recently actually started last week, we are doing weekly GOTV like hype meetings where we're getting together over Zoom just to like get excited because I mean, I feel so sad that we can't do it in person because it would be so much more fun. And like whatever happens on election night, that would be way more fun to have happened with, together in person. But for now, we're doing these like weekly hype up meetings to kind of come together and appreciate each other and, really like feel our feelings, all of them, all across the spectrum. Sorry, that's my cat.
Celebrating on Zoom is great, but it doesn't beat like obviously like the energy when you're with other people and you're celebrating and you're hanging out and you're working towards a common goal and feel like you're doing good in the world. You both have, so let me back up. Voting is a local act, right? You vote at the local, state, federal level, but you're voting based off of your address. It's something that you do locally. But the thing that's great about both of you is that you have a very broad and deep understanding of the voting process and voting mechanisms across the country, not just in kind of your home jurisdiction, based off of the work that you both do. I want to start with Andre with this question. Based off of kind of, and what you have is a lot of, you understand history like any good alpha brother does. A very good understanding of history and the history of voting, and how voting is so often been pulled away from people that look like us, right? All of us, right? Has anything surprised you in this election cycle compared to others, whether good or bad? Based off of that, again, your depth of history and understanding of voting, like, has anything surprised you at all? And if so, like, what has surprised you?
Well, I'll say I'm never really like surprised like by some of these things because, you know, with voting, it just this country has always found a way to try to limit. It's so weird that we have always found a way to limit how people can vote, who can vote, like, you know, when and where. It's just it's insane to me, right? And like while we do expand vote and while the electorate expands, we still have to be very cognizant of the new ways in which voter suppression looks, right? So it may not be a poll tax like in the 1960s anymore. It may come in the form of in Florida, right, where they just restored felons' right to vote, right? And then the legislature says, oh, well, you have to now pay before you can vote, right? That's essentially a poll tax, right? Or here in Georgia, where the Secretary of State says, oh, I'm going to mail out all these ballots, but you have to pay for your own postage, right? That's also a form of a poll tax, right? So they find different ways to essentially try to limit people from voting. But, you know, there are organizations like what Alex is doing, what Fair Fight is doing, what a lot of organizations across the state and the country are currently involved in doing to protect people's right to vote and make sure that everyone does and can cast their ballot. So organizers are always going to be organizers. We will adapt with the way, you know, things are going. We're going to fight and make sure that we can allow people, make sure people that are allowed to get the right to vote can vote. Just yesterday, the University of Georgia, they tried to take away a polling location, and our team jumped on that. And within 24 hours, that polling location was restored. And that only goes to like organizing, right? Local organizing, collaboration with organizers and organizations to make sure that people are held accountable when they try to limit access to the ballot. Because, you know, these are things that are just going to happen, right? So I'm not surprised, but I am happy to know that there are people who are literally ready and willing to, you know, lay down their lives essentially in sacrifice to make sure that other people can vote, especially in this year when we know it's so critically important.
And historically, that's what it's taken, right? It's taken people laying down their lives so that other people could ensure that they had the right to vote. Thanks for sharing that, Andre. And with the example you illustrated around like what happened at UGA, University of Georgia, is what Andre is talking about. So on campus there, and the work that you all did to solve that problem, right? That can't be overstated. That's amazing work, and thank you for doing that.
And if I just say too, it also goes to like building like before and being prepared. Like I know Alex's organization has probably been preparing for like over a year or so. This all started with us. Like we started this thing called Fair Fight U last year. So we built these college level chapters, and it was basically the college chapter that they advocated for themselves, right? Like, you know, organizations, we get resources, we partner, but the victory really goes to organizations like chapters and young people like them. So
that's awesome. And that's putting power in the hands of people, right? You have advocacy groups that are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing, but it's work to be able to empower people to do their civic duty, right? If they so choose. Alex, what about you? Has anything in this election cycle, in this year, surprised you? Whether it's something that you've seen locally, nationally, on the news, maybe something that you've actually seen in person yourself. Like, has anything surprised you? And if so, what has been those things?
Something that we always try to think about is like, let's not overwhelm the voter. Let's just give them the information they need. And this year, there's so much information that is overwhelming to voters, or not just information, but there's so much stuff going on, whether it's COVID or like new rules for voting by mail. And one thing that we've been kind of thinking about is like this news about post office delays, and like what we don't know is like how to message this exactly, because we don't want to be like, don't vote by mail because there are delays, but we don't want to be like, it's totally, you can vote by mail up to the last minute, you know? And so I think a surprising thing to me is this, how ready people are to talk about the things that worry them, and how that gets filtered down to voters and in a way that can be overwhelming. And maybe that shouldn't be surprising, but I think it's something that we think a lot about, and like, how do we just make it super clear? This voter needs to do this, and they have these options, and because we don't want it to be too overwhelming for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Alex, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. All right, so bear with me. We got the folks that are tuned in, that are watching. A lot of them are leaders of organizations, and they're probably trying to do exactly what you just said, right? Trying to figure out how do they craft a message either to their employees, but also to the communities that they represent, that they work with. What's like, how would you craft that message, particularly around mail-in voting? Like, what is the message that folks that are tuned in can share with their stakeholders around like what's going on and how to properly communicate that?
Okay, I actually think it's pretty easy. Well, famous last words for now. It's easy. But I think the best thing to do is tell voters what their options are. So whether it is you need to mail in your ballot in this time range, or, you know, there are always rules for every state. It needs to be received by or sent by this date. So make sure to tell them that, but also tell them what other options they have. Like, you can drop off your ballot at a drop box, or if you want to vote in person because you're worried about delays, here's how you can vote early and when you can vote early. So basically giving the voter the information to make their own choice. And then the voter feels like, okay, they have several good options for how to vote, hopefully. And just being clear about what those options are, I think, is the best thing to do for voters.
Awesome. And so another question to put you both on the spot. I'll start with Andre on this one. So we know the options, right? Like I can run through them really quickly, right? Show up on November 3rd, vote. Show up to the polls early, right, and vote. Mail in your vote. Am I missing an option? Right. Those are the primary options you have to actually vote. Andre, the question is, out of those options, what is the option that you believe is the one that is the best one? If all things equal, what is the option that you would advocate people take advantage of? The one.
Yeah, so we're in a pandemic right now, and as much as we can limit putting our safety and our health, at risk, I would definitely encourage people to vote by mail or absentee ballot. Like, the language is interchangeable, even though people are trying to confuse us right now. I would definitely say vote by mail. And to add on to Alex's point, with the drop boxes, there are some places like in Georgia where you can actually physically deliver your absentee ballot to the Board of Elections, drop it off literally there, and make sure that it gets there safely as well. And usually quick. That's what I have encouraged my grandparents to do, because they live in a place where there aren't many drop boxes, right? And they're elderly. So I say, hey, I want y'all to vote by mail. Don't go stand in anyone's line. If you get that absentee ballot, just take it over to the Bullitt County Board of Elections. It's only a 3-minute drive from your house. So go on and take it there. So I would definitely encourage vote by mail. or absentee ballot, however y'all want to use that term.
And remember, those two things for the audience, those two things are the same. They're interchangeable. Alex, what about you?
I'm going to say the same thing. So vote by mail. For my number one choice would be sign up to vote by mail and then drop it off if you can, whether at the Board of Election or in a Dropbox, if that's easier for you. I do think the other options are really good, but to your point, like, people want to be safe, and that is a really good decision for people. So voting by mail is the safest option.
Definitely. And if you do go, please wear your damn masks. All right, we'll pause there, go on to the next question. To both of you. So, again, we're having a conversation around voter equity, and that's something that all of us care about. Everybody that's on this call cares about voter equity. We throw around a lot of terms: voter equity. We talk about voter suppression. We talk about voter enfranchisement. Can each of you give a definition of voter equity and what that means to you and to your organization? Alex, start with you.
Yeah. I think of it as anyone can, I don't want to say any eligible person, because I think who's eligible to vote should be more than it is currently, should be able to easily cast their vote. So I think the areas that we need to work on are increasing who is eligible, like people who have been in prison in Florida, for example. I also think it's about making it actually easy for them to vote. If it's at all difficult, then that's not equity. It needs to be super easy.
Cool. And Andre, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what's your definition of voter equity?
I think Alex hit like right there. That is the perfect definition. I just would say that, when we talk about voter protection, right? Like, this is not just a partisan thing, right? So if there, I lean towards one particular party, but even if there are people in the other party whose right to vote is being trampled on, like, I believe it's a duty to make sure that they have their right to vote as well, because we should all be able to choose our leaders, even if you're not going for the person who I particularly care for. You should still be able to voice your power and your opinion in that manner. John Lewis, God rest his soul, just passed away. He always said that the vote is the most powerful instrument we have in a democratic society, right? So if you are a Democrat, you're a Republican, independent, libertarian, constitutionalist, like whoever, like, your views may not be aligned with mine, but I'm always going to believe that you should be able to vote. So that I would just add that on to Alex's definition.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and just start talking and have a conversation about voter suppression and what that looks like. Again, that term is tossed around a lot, but you can't beat an enemy that you can't see, right? You can't defeat an enemy that you can't see. So what does voter suppression look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? What does it read like? And if you have any concrete examples of maybe things that you've seen around regarding voter suppression in this election cycle. So I'm going to start with you, Andre. I think you have a really good pulse on this. So answer that question. What does voter suppression look like, and some examples that you've seen recently?
Yeah, so it's also an atmosphere, right, that people try to create. So I think that is one thing. And most people don't even recognize voter suppression when it happens to them. So the first thing I would say is just recently, the Secretary of State here in the state of Georgia has gone on this crusade to literally say, oh, there's been an increase in double voting here in the state, right? So he's also said this without any proof, without any type of like data to support this claim, right? The same thing happened with Brian Kemp. He said, a few years ago when he was Secretary of State that, there are these people and organizations who are illegally registering people to vote, right? It looks like purging voters from the rolls, right? It looks like saying, oh, there's this exact match. So, your signature has to match your driver's license when you go to like sign this document to be able to vote. It looks like provisional ballots, right, in different counties. So provisional ballots, when you go to vote, example, we had an increase in provisional ballots in 2018 here in the state of Georgia. And what happened is people would go to a precinct that they believed they were supposed to vote at. Some people this might be an infrequent voter, right? Someone who hasn't voted in a couple elections, but they say, hey, I'm inspired by this candidate and I want to, cast my ballot for him or her. They would go to their precinct and they would get there and the poll worker would say, oh, you're not, this is not where you're supposed to vote. And you have to go maybe 15 to 20 minutes away to actually cast your ballot. Now think about like someone who works at like McDonald's, right? Or, someone who's like a janitor and they have to get back to work. They went to vote on their lunch break and now they have to get back to work. So they have to make a choice, right? Am I going to lose pay right now? Or am I going to try to like fight this and cast my ballot? And what happened was the poll worker said, oh, well, if you don't want to go all the way to this other precinct, you can fill out what's called a provisional ballot here. And basically, we'll take care of it after. So what happens is they didn't give these people all the information that they needed. And they also didn't tell the people that they had to follow up in the days after to make sure that their provisional ballot had been accepted. And then there are times where the county can either just accept or reject the provisional ballot altogether. They can say, oh, well, no, we don't want to accept this. So you had to like chase. So that's a form of voter suppression as well, right? Because, you're not giving people all information. You have poorly trained poll workers who are not telling people that they need to do this. And this is no fault of the poll workers themselves. It's like they're not getting training and guidance from either the county elections officials or the Secretary of State, right? So these are just some new ways in which voter suppression shows up. It goes with, folks cutting down early vote days, right? Or trying to cut the number of precincts that are in a particular county. This happened in a few counties around the state. One would be Randolph County, which is in Southwest Georgia. They tried to cut the amount of precincts, and we saw that these precincts were in heavily African-American areas, right? So they knew that these voters tend to vote in one way, especially in this part of the state. So voter suppression, that's another way to look at it. So one is it's at the creating the atmosphere of, the Secretary of State or the former Secretary of State making these comments without information and data to back it up. But it's also a list of, the ways that I just outlined as well.
So, I mean, my takeaway from that is if it smells funny, it is funny, right? There's some funny business happening, whether it's like, the overall policy atmosphere is indicative of like smelling funny, not getting enough information and that information not being, readily available. Like the polling stations aren't manned and, are managed in a way where it's conducive to people being able to come out and actually cast their ballot. So, the takeaway, if it smells funny, it is funny. We're going to talk about tactics on how to combat voter suppression shortly. But Alex, I want to ask you the same question. How do you define voter suppression? What does it smell like, look like, feel like? If there's anything to add on top of what Andre said.
Just that because of COVID, there are some things where giving the Board of Election the benefit of the doubt. They've been doing things their way, and this is their process. But because of COVID, it makes it much harder for people. Like, for example, like requiring that a witness signs your absentee ballot request, and therefore you need to like get close enough to someone that would invalidate social distancing. I think that they've had to be very careful to not create more voter suppression, but by in figuring out new processes for COVID. And I don't think they've all done a great job there.
Awesome. And for both of you, and we'll start with Alex on this one. What are tactics that organizations can use? Like, you know, we're getting really close to the election. I don't know how many days away we are now, but does anybody have Alex, do you have a desktop countdown?
Now I just know in my head we have 47 days. So
I just had a hunch that you had it. All right, so we're 47 days away from the election. So that doesn't leave a lot of time in terms of like protecting the vote and combating voter suppression. So there's you know, it's going to be a combination of things that you could do work on structurally, because remember, this is not just for 2020, it's just 2020 and beyond. So trying to engage in structural change is important, but also grassroots change, right, and grassroots actions to be able to combat voter suppression. I'll leave this open-ended, so either one of you can jump in and answer. What are some structural long-term remedies for voter suppression, to combat voter suppression? And then what are some grassroots things that people can jump up, do right now, and help ensure that their community members, that their family members have the right to vote, and that there's no sort of suppression that's kind of inhibiting them from being able to participate in democracy? All right, I'll pick somebody. I'll start with Andre.
I'm sorry. I thought Alice was going to go first. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You know, this is a really good question. So, I'll just let you know what some of the things that we have been doing here with Fair Fight. So, we really ramped up our team and our operation. So we created this the Fair Fight 2020 program, right? Not only to combat voter suppression here in the state of Georgia, which we had done by creating the nation's first, full-time voter protection team in the country, right? Before 2018, the only voter protection team in the country had been housed at the Democratic National Committee. In 2018, we fully funded and housed a voter protection team here in the state of Georgia. And in 2019, once Fair Fight ramped up, we started to build this in 19 other states around the country, which we identified as battleground states, right? In conjunction with the DNC and now with the nominee. So, that was like one prong, right, of making sure that not just Georgia, but like states around the country knew what this looks like. And what the program is we pretty much we train and fully fund these operations. They're all run by either state parties or organizations that are really influential, like in the states. So like in Mississippi, the Mississippi NAACP has a heavy hand in making sure that this program runs. But in states like Minnesota, it's the Minnesota party that pretty much runs this program. So here in Georgia, one of the things we've done is, through legislative session, right, we help to stop bad legislation that would have, limited folks' right to vote. There was a bad Senate bill that was up this year that we helped kill. It's showing up to the state elections board meeting and making sure that we hold them accountable if they're making rules changes. So building up democracy warriors around the state to make sure that, not just in Metro Atlanta, but in some of these small pockets in the state, these local board of elections and these local elected officials are being held accountable to any time they try to make changes to voting, whether that be closing a precinct, whether that be moving precincts to places like police stations, right, where we know that is a cause of voter suppression and intimidation, right? Because if folks know that a polling location is in a police station and you're poor or you're a marginalized citizen, you're probably not going to want to go in there. You might have like a traffic ticket or something like that and think, hey, they might ask for my name and then pull this up, right? These are fear tactics that people create. So making sure that our democracy warriors know and fight against that. Then partnering with other organizations who are doing the work. Organizations like Black Votes Matter here in Georgia, America Votes, and these C4 tables that we have of organizations that are dedicated to making sure that we are helping people when these type of issues come up. Additionally, making sure that people know like when important dates are, right? So using our expansive resources like our email list to, send out updates saying like, hey, early vote starts this day. You can request your absentee ballots this day. If you're having trouble finding your polling location, or if you're registered to vote, click on this link right here and you can go. We do massive weekends of action around different voting. So recruiting poll workers, recruiting line warmers and folks who can collect stories and get declarations so that we're building a record, right? To show that, okay, the Secretary of State says we didn't have any issues with this election, but in 73 counties, we've noticed that there is a pattern of voter suppression happening right now, right? So these are just, some of the ways that, we are helping and some tactics that we're using to fight voter suppression in the state. And then, we have a pretty good surrogate, right, who can pretty much go out there, grab a mic and say, hey, like, this is how you should be requesting your absentee ballot. You should be making a voter plan, and trying to amplify, her voice as much as possible because people are going to listen to those that they trust. So yeah, those are just a few of the tactics that we're using. There's a lot more, but I don't want to take up too much time from Alex to explain something. Yeah.
That was fantastic, and I wrote some of them down that I'll share with the audience to kind of to synthesize and give you kind of points on what to do, right? So the way that what I heard kind of broken it down in two ways, right? What can you do now, and then what can you do later to become a democracy warrior? And I love that term, democracy warrior. So for folks listening, what can you do right now? One, publicize the information, right? Like if you're somebody that's tuned into this call, you're probably somebody that's like, damn it, I'm a vote, right? So you have the information, put it, make it public, share it on your Facebook. Trust me, I get it at times on Facebook. You don't want to be the person that's constantly sharing information. You think everybody knows. Believe me, people do not know. It'll get to somebody. So share that information around voter registration, around where the polling places are, that type of stuff. Put that in the link. So that's great advice there, Andre. And then two, in terms of what you can do right now, you can do things like become a poll worker. And we're going to share a list of resources for folks that are tuned in right now, but and how to do something like that and how to become a poll worker, a local poll worker. But those are things that concrete steps you can take right now to try to do the best you possibly can to participate in democracy. And then long term, you mentioned a couple of things on what it means to build structurally change things, or at least ensure the vote. And really be a democracy warrior around those. And that's one, finding local advocacy organizations that are specifically around voter protection to support, to participate, to donate to. No matter where you are, where you're listening right now, I promise you, your city, your state has an advocacy group that's doing this work. Support them, participate. That's a longer term play that can really work for communities to make sure that they don't lose any sort of voting rights and really ensure and protect that vote. And then the second thing is that you mentioned is partnering with organizations. So a lot of folks that are on this call right now, they're running tech startups. I'm going to pass the mic over to Alex shortly as somebody that's running a tech startup. They're running tech startups different ways as a company, as an organization, for you to partner with these advocacy groups, right? Long-term, supporting them, that type of thing. So one as an individual, but two as an organization. And again, we'll share some of those resources specifically with links and that type of thing later on today or tomorrow in an email. But Alex, I want to pass it on to you to answer that same question around how how you fight against voter suppression, and what are you doing to help your company and the people in your company be able to make sure that they ensure that their right to vote is ensured.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing is we do not let our employees off for election day because they are very busy that day. So, but we do encourage other companies, other tech companies to do that. Another thing I was going to add is for individual voters, there are voter protection hotlines that you can call, and a national one is 866 Our Vote. Our OUR vote, but there are also local versions that are like they may be the state party's number, but that it can be good to have that number ready if you're going to go vote in person, or just to know it when you're voting by mail, so you're ready to call if you face an issue or if you witness an issue.
Awesome. Thanks for adding to that, Alex. So moving into the next question. And let me take a quick pause here. There are some questions that are coming in, so we're going to get to those questions probably in the next 10 minutes or so. But if you do have a question, please post it. I think you should have, as a viewer, a section for comments, and we're seeing those come through. So we'll get to those questions in a little bit here and answer all of those. But moving to the next question based off of our agenda, and we'll start with Alex on this. Voting is not a once every 4 years situation, right? This is something that you should be participating in democracy, something that should be habitual, right? So it's just to be part of living in America. If you have the right to vote, you should try your best. Freedom is freedom, right? You don't have to do anything in the United States necessarily, but it's highly encouraged that you participate in the democratic process, right, which is voting. But it's not something that's just once every 4 years. So Alex, what advice do you have for the folks that are listening that are leaders of organizations to continue to encourage their community members, their organizations, their employees to keep this up, right? To keep the momentum to vote in local elections and statewide elections, and every 2 years in midterms. What advice do you have for folks that are tuned in around that?
I think right now we've seen that people really want to take action, whether it's all these protests that have been happening over the last few months, or everything people are posting online about the world that they want to see and the change they want to see. So I think there's a lot of hunger for people to want to make a difference. But at the same time, people can feel inundated by news about the presidential candidates, and it can feel, just overwhelming, everything bad that's going on. So I think one way to do it is by giving people information that's hey, did you know there are going to be all these local races up, not just on the ballot on November 3rd this year, but there are 95,000 offices up for election in 2021. And that's 95,000 opportunities for us to change the country. I mean, some of them are smaller than voting for president, but those local elected officials do make such a big difference on our daily lives. And people kind of forget that, but it's an opportunity for them to take action and make their own choices. So I think number one is reminding people about all the local stuff that happens, and how much more important and impactful their voices in elections that are decided by 3, 11, 30 votes, and making it clear that it's super easy to be involved in those. You don't have to have a degree in political science to make a good choice about who should be your sheriff. It is really possible to be informed and not pay attention to this stuff every day.
And Alex will not plug BallotReady at this specific moment. I'll do it for her. One thing you can do as a leader in your organization is reach out to Alex and work with BallotReady and help inform your employees. And that's one really easy way and smart way, in my opinion, to be able to do that. So thanks for sharing that, Alex.
Thank you.
Andre, same question to you, right? How do we keep the momentum as leaders in organizations and encourage our folks to continue to participate in democracy by voting?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say is like, just make it a conversation, right? I try to approach this the same way I would talk to my cousins and like my friends and whatnot, because most of them aren't in the political space. And I just like end up real quick. A few weeks ago, my cousin, my brother, and one of our friends, we were just sitting around, and literally my cousins, they never talk about politics, but somehow the conversation came up and they mentioned Trump, right? And they mentioned voting. And somehow we like got deeper into it. And then we started talking about, the extrajudicial killings that have been happening with regards to Black and brown people, like in this country. Like it's been happening for a long time, but like the augmentation of it over the last couple of months, right? This year alone, it seems like there's a new name every single day. And they said, how do we change that, right? Like, how do we stop this? And, we started talking about, defunding the police versus abolishment of the police, right? We started talking about like the climate, right? And like lead in the waters, around some of these school districts that are here in the state. We started talking about, what these stimulus checks means, like how we get them and whatnot. But then it went to like even more local issues. And we talked about, I asked them, I said, oh, did y'all vote in the primary? And both of them said, yeah, we voted in the primary, but the lines were really long. And at one point I wanted to leave because my cousin said, my fiance, she's pregnant right now, and I didn't want her to have to stand out there, for 3 hours just to vote, right? But she said, no, it's fine because there's a lot that's going on right now, and we need to be able to vote for DA, right? And we need to be able to vote for sheriff, right? Because we believe that these people share like our values and the things that we care about. And it may sound corny, but like it's true. And then even when I went to vote, I am a part of a voting rights organization that, I didn't get my absentee ballot on time. It literally came like a couple of days before. And I said, I'm not going to be able to like do anything with this. So I just went on the last day of early vote. I went to a location where I thought that the lines would be short, but lo and behold, I waited for 3 hours to vote in the primary. And while I was online, there were these people who were talking about, oh man, like, what are we voting for today? This is for president, right? I said, yes, if you didn't vote in the presidential preference primary back in March here in the state, you can vote for president today. But if you did, that's not going to show up on your ballot, right? So what you're voting for is your state house, your state senate. You're voting for what we have: public service commission. We had district attorney. We had sheriff, and then we had a host of judges, right? So these are all the people who like we need to be paying attention to, especially to Alex's point about local politics. These are people who are going to help with the defunding of police. These are the folks who are going to help us and who we need to target when we start talking about reimagining public safety, like in our areas. These are the folks who, like, if there are issues, we're most likely to show up, show up before, right? So there needs to be like a focus. One, I'm very big on voter education. So like you can get your sample ballots now too. You can know who you're going to be voting for, and it gives you time to research these people. Do they share your values? Do they align with, how you see the country moving forward, right? If you're a person who is talking about the reimagination of public safety or the abolishment of like police, right? Or if you care about climate change and the environment, right? Like where does that candidate stand, right? And then like, oh, are they having any events like before? Because some people are having virtual events. Some people are doing some small public events. Like, can I pull up to one of these events, right? And like ask a question. So voter education is like so important. And I'm just like, please, like, just be informed before you go and cast those ballots, because there was a friend who said, hey, I'm not sure about who to vote for. I see our district attorney, Paul Howard, he just said he's going to bring charges against these police officers who killed Rayshard Brooks, right? Not knowing that Paul Howard has a history of corruption, right? And he's in a fight for his life. So of course he's going to do that, right? So let's look at his opponent, right? What has she been doing? Like, how is she talking about the election? What policy prescriptions is she putting forward? So educating ourselves like to be good voters is also another thing. So we can't just say, oh, let's go out and vote. Let's have a conversation about like who is on the ballot, like who can we put our trust in, at least for 2 years or 4 years, and if not, let's go back to the drawing board and like get somebody else to do it or do it ourselves.
Man, that was beautifully said. And I want to touch on two things that you mentioned there that I think that are really important. One, voter education. And you said that's something that's really important to you. Alex, I would like for you to share your thoughts on voter education, because that's literally the work that you do on an everyday basis. And then the other thing that I want to touch on after that is policy. And that's something that we're passionate about at Civic Eagle is a policy, right? Because we really want to ensure structural change, and structural change comes from changing the law. You change the law by putting policies and legislation in place that change the law. So Alex, starting with you, can you just share your thoughts on voter education? And then Andre, you can after that share your thoughts on changing policy.
Yeah. The way that Andre was talking about it reminded me to say, I think that it can be tempting to be condescending to voters, but like, obviously Andre is not going to be condescending to voters, and that's why his friends are willing to admit, oh, I don't know about this. And that's how you start a discussion. And I think there is rhetoric out there that's like, young people are lazy, they're uninformed, that, they're not going to actually vote because of those reasons. But it's a little bit difficult to figure out who's going to be on your ballot. Plus, you have all these other things to take care of in your life. So I think we need to give voters like a lot of understanding and compassion and make it really easy for them to understand. So that's kind of a long way of saying our first principle at Ballot Ready, which is like, make it really easy for voters. Don't never be condescending to them. And that's like, we can have all this data that we have on all the candidates and all this information, but if we come off as condescending, like, it's not educating people. So one, it's like the tone in which we talk to people. And then two, it's like voters need to know information that applies to them, whether it's about how to vote, how to vote by mail, where their polling place is, or what's on their ballot. Like, getting the information you need to vote is very empowering, and it lets you make the decisions that you need to make for yourself.
Beautifully said as well, Alex. Andre, thoughts on policy?
Yeah, so I try to look at what can states right now do to improve voting rights, right? So there are a variety of policies that progressive activists can pursue to strengthen voting rights at the state level. And some of these are already available in many states, such as early voting, and others are still quite rare. But I would say you should check out your state's voter access scorecard on what's called the Franchise Project website to see which policies are already like in your state. So one thing, the first thing I would say is automatic voter registration, right? So automatic voter registration changes voter registration from an opt-in system where people must affirmatively request to be registered to vote to an opt-out system in which eligible citizens are automatically registered to vote when they interact with a government agency, unless they choose not to be. So under that, once a person is registered to vote, the said agency electronically sends this voter information to elections officials. So basically bypassing the paper forms. Then electronic transfer helps to clean up voter registration rolls, which in turn results in lower rates of errors, and it's less confusion when voters go to the polls. And because automatic voter registration creates a more accurate and up-to-date voter information system, it also helps to decrease the likelihood of improper voter purges. So Oregon and Vermont are two states that implemented what's called AVR in 2016 and 2017. And they saw large jumps in voter registration as a result, right? Another thing you can do is online voter registration. Online voter registration is an important way to make voting more accessible and voter rolls more accurate. This is a policy that creates secure online portals where people can register to vote as well as check and update their registration records. The next would be same-day voter registration. So in most states, people can register to vote in advance of election day, whether it's for a primary, a runoff, or a general election, sometimes a month or more before they have to vote. So allowing voters to register and vote on the same day requires less planning on the voters' part, and therefore it results in more people voting. So states that implement same-day voter registration typically see an increase in voter turnout. And I know Oregon is one of the states that actually has same-day voter registration. Then this is one of my favorites, early voting and no excuse absentee voting. So not everyone can find time to vote on election day. So voters, they have to manage work. Like I said before earlier, like, you know, the example of the McDonald's worker or like the janitor, they have to manage family, they have to manage illness and other responsibilities or unexpected roadblocks, right, that prevent them from getting to the polls. There are two ways that states can alleviate this problem, allowing voters to cast in-person votes at polling sites or election offices before election day, which is early voting, or allowing voters to cast early votes by mail for any reason. So that's what's called no excuse absentee ballot. Then the voting rights restoration. I know Alex mentioned it earlier, but the right to vote should never be revoked, ever, under any circumstance. But most states strip or suspend voting rights from people with criminal convictions. All states, with the exception of, I believe it is Maine and New Hampshire, no, Vermont, they disallow prisoners from voting. So in Maine and Vermont, prisoners can actually vote. And the rules, government voting rights after incarceration vary drastically from state to state. And this system is like, it's very undemocratic. Many states bar people with felony convictions from voting. So in most states with criminal disenfranchisement laws, people are eligible to vote again after completing their prison term, parole, or probation. In Iowa and Kentucky, though, people with criminal convictions in their past are banned from voting for life. That is just unacceptable, right? So no matter the degree of severity, all criminal disenfranchisement laws are really undemocratic. And they disproportionately harm people of color due to racial inequities in the criminal justice system. Basically, if your state currently disenfranchises prisoners or people, with felony convictions, you can work on restoring their right to vote.
I got you, man. Take a breath. I got you.
Yeah. It's a lot.
You giving us everything right now. I appreciate that.
So the Brennan Center for Justice, they're a great organization, and they have a state-by-state map of criminal disenfranchisement laws on their website. just other informations on state efforts to repeal these provisions. Then we have, you can prevent voter purges. There's election security issues. And yeah, those are like some of the main ways. But I'm going to stop talking now because I definitely don't want to take up too much time from Alex.
Yeah. Hey, folks tuning in, Andre is giving us his whole voice right now to make sure that we get this information. Appreciate that, man. All right, so we have some questions in the comments area. So I'm gonna start posing those questions. We don't have too much time left. So some were answered along the way, so I won't talk about those. But I believe some of those earlier questions have been answered. But one question that sticks out to me that was interesting. Do you recommend poll watching in November to report voter oppression if it happens? And this person recalls doing this in St. Louis in the 1990s. So either one of you want to take that question?
Sure, I'll go. Definitely. So one thing that we're doing at Fair Fight is we're recruiting not just poll workers, but poll watchers, line warmers, people who can literally watch the polls. I think it's a very effective way because literally it helps to build a record, like I was talking about before, to combat the narrative that one side may try to portray, like, oh, everything in voting is going well. We had an increase in turnout. All these people requested absentee ballots, no problem, right? But no, that's not typically what happens. There's still issues that will happen from precinct to precinct, from county to county, from state to state. So definitely, I would say being a poll watcher is definitely something I would encourage people to do, especially this cycle.
Cool. Another question, more of a general question. How can we as voters, stay informed about voter suppression efforts that may be happening in our cities or states, and what could we do about it? I think we talked a little bit about what we can do about it, but what about the staying informed part of that question? Like, how can you stay informed? Is there, are there websites out there that are keeping track, or reporters something that are keeping track of like things that are happening in different cities and states? I don't know of any of those resources, but wondering if Alex or Andre, either of you do.
I feel like Andre will have a better list than I do, but I follow a lot of people on Twitter. So there's the organizations, but there are also just like reporters who cover this kind of thing, and other voter suppression experts that I like to follow.
Yeah, definitely that's something I do as well. Like our organization, Fair Fight, we usually are pumping out information on voter suppression and when it's happening. Because another thing that we're going to have to do this year as well is combat the disinformation campaigns that are going around. So you have these bots and you have these people who are just putting out this terrible information, like to say like vote by mail is illegal, right? Because people will try to vote twice. And that you should use absentee ballots when they're the same thing. It's crazy. Or the president saying these crazy things on Twitter and then it being amplified. So disinformation is something that we should be combating. But one organization that I typically like to get a lot of information for is the Brennan Center for Justice. They do a great job at pushing out this information. There's also a really great elections lawyer, Mark Elias, who is just like a giant. He tends to work for one side of the aisle, but I will say he is very fair in pushing out the information in terms of voter suppression. So like I would say voter suppression attorneys like on social media, voter protection attorneys on social media, and the Brennan Center for Justice. And then our organization, plus a few that are continually pumping out information on what to watch out for.
Awesome. Another question, where can this person find a list of which states Fair Fight chapters are in?
Yeah, so I can actually like jot them down right now. So we are in Arizona. We are in Georgia. We're in Virginia. We're in Wisconsin. We are in Florida. We're in Maine. We are in Michigan. We are in Mississippi. Um, we are in Minnesota. We are in Nevada. We are in North Carolina. We're in Ohio. And yeah, wait, no, we're in Pennsylvania as well. We're in South Carolina. We're in Texas and New Mexico. Yeah.
Was that off the top?
I had to go and like look for one more because I wasn't sure. That's why I said New Mexico, because I just went and said, oh yeah, New Mexico was the last one because I knew I forgot one. I tried to go in alphabetical order.
An honest man, because we can totally
New Mexico, I definitely did not remember.
All right.
I had to look at that one real quick.
And then the another question on the board, what cities, and this is the tough one, what cities in Georgia experienced the most voter suppression? That's targeted at Andre.
You know, I wouldn't say there are specific cities, but you know, the metro area experiences a lot of it. You know, we had problems in DeKalb County, which is a heavily Democratic county, right? But this is not sometimes because of like tactics, right? Or anything nefarious. This is because, you know, maybe poll workers are poorly trained or, you know, machines don't arrive on time and things like that. So we also have to make sure that we are creating the right narrative for this. But then you have like counties in like middle Georgia or southwest Georgia. I mentioned Randolph County earlier, where they tried to close precincts in heavily African-American areas, right? So I went limited to just like one space, but this can happen anywhere around the state. You know, like Fulton County's in the news a lot. You guys probably see like every election, but you know, Fulton also has 2 million people who live here, right? It's the largest county in the state, so you're bound to have some issues with voting and whatnot. But they can also happen in very small counties like in Randolph and Lee County and Sumter and Doherty, right? So it's not limited to one space, but this is something that can happen all around.
And I think that's the biggest takeaway. It can happen anywhere, right? So keep your head on a swivel is what I like to say, because it can happen anywhere. Okay, so we're going to start wrapping up. So just a few more things. One last question to both of you, and that's takeaways, right? Just, you know, what is something that you want to leave the conversation, leave the viewers of the conversation with as we close and wrap up. I want to start with Alex to wrap up her last thoughts and share with the audience.
Okay, we have 47 days. We calculated it. It's like 300 working hours. So let's assume you sleep and take some like weekend and break until election day. And we know there's going to be voter suppression, but we need to do as much as we can in these last 47 days. And whether that work is donating to Fair Fight or, you know, telling people you know about Ballot Ready and here's how you can vote, here's how you can get information on your ballot. Like, we need to fight and work as hard as we can in these last 47 days.
Thanks a lot, Alex. And again, she won't share this, but it was probably one of the dopest things that I've ever experienced. It didn't even happen to me. I'm sitting there watching the NBA playoffs, and Kevin Harlan. And for those of you that are NBA fans, Kevin Harlan is like the OG, like NBA announcer. Starts talking about Ballot Ready, and I almost fell out my seat. Like it was the coolest thing hearing him pump up and share Ballot Ready with with everybody that was watching. I don't even remember the game, but I just remember Kevin Harlan talking about Ballot Ready. But that's you got to go to BallotReady. Is it com or org?
Either one.
Either one will work. All right. And you'll see get more information about Ballot Ready from there. And your organization should definitely look at working with Ballot Ready and informing and educating your employees around, the ballot, around who to vote, like who's on the ballot and who could they be voting for. So let's go ahead and go to Andre. Andre, can you share your last thoughts with the audience, and then I'll go ahead and wrap up.
Yeah, so I just want to say that the notion of voter suppression is linked in the common parlance with like the 1950s and the 1960s with billy clubs and hoses and dogs barking at voters trying to get inside with poll taxes. Current day voter suppression is much more insidious, in part because it looks like user error. It's you should have checked to make sure you're still on the rolls, as opposed to putting the onus on a system that should not be allowed to remove you without any extraordinary exercise. And, as our founder and coach and chair has said, we know that voting feels inadequate right now with everything going on in the world, but it's a first step in a long and complex process, tedious but vital, right? And the one thing I guess that I want to leave you all with is just that, voting will not save us from harm, but silence will surely damn us all. And that we should really make sure that we are taking into account, what we want our world to look like, and what we want the world to look like for our children and, for generations that come after us. So definitely, I would say, please make a plan to vote, whether that be by absentee, vote by mail, or if you feel you want to go to the polls, however you do it, like, let's just make a plan, make sure you know who your candidates are, please. And, let's do our part to, make the world a little bit better.
Do our part to make the world a little bit better. Definitely agree with that. And just before we sign off, at Civic Eagle, we created a voting pledge as something for startups, smaller businesses, organizations to sign up for, and just as a call to action, as something that you can do and you can pledge to do as leaders of your organization, to say, hey, I'm going to encourage my employees, I'm going to encourage my team to go out and vote. And there's some commitments that you can make on there, and you can share that pledge with other leaders, other startup leaders, business leaders, organizational leaders in your network. And we're going to share that information out publicly. It's on the website. So you just you see the link there, civiceagle.com/voting-pledge for more information on that. But thank you all for tuning in. Like I said earlier, we're going to share some resources with folks that have tuned in, some links, information. You should have everybody's contact. There was a question earlier about how can we reach out to the panel members. Andre, do you want to share your email address really quickly?
Yes, it's just Andre, ANDRE, at fairfightaction.com.
Awesome. And Alex, you want to share your email address really quickly as well?
Yeah, it's alex@BallotReady.org.
And I'm Damola at CivicEagle.com. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody. And again, go out, vote, encourage your folks, your people to vote, and have a great rest of the year. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.